Finally, brethren, whether we are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things.
There's a story told of a farmer who got really discouraged, and he thought he needed to change farms. So he called a realtor, and he asked him to look over his farm, and he said, I want you to go create an attractive ad. I want to sell this farm, I want to move somewhere else, and I want to start all over again. And so the realtor came, looked over his farm, and in a few weeks, he called the farmer back and he said, hey, I found a new place for you. He said, well, look, until I sell this farm, I can't buy a new farm. He said, well, just listen to this ad. And he read it to him, and it went something like this. Incredible farm with a great location. Includes a well-maintained house, sturdy barns, lush pasture lands, a beautiful pond, fertile soil, and a great view. The discouraged farmer listened real carefully, and he said, read that back to me one more time, real slowly. And the realtor read it back to him once again, and the discouraged farmer said, that's exactly the kind of place I've been looking for. You probably know how this ends already. The realtor said, sir, what I've just read to you is your own ad that I've created to sell your farm. Isn't it interesting how many times things in life turn on perspective? You know, when we just look at things a little bit differently. You know all the old adages about the glass half full, half empty, the donut or the hole, or the rose, but then there are the thorns. It's always interesting how we look at things, the perspective we take. Ella Wheeler Wilcox expressed this attitude when she wrote these words, one ship sails east and another west. With the selfsame winds they blow. 'Tis the set of the sail and not the gale which determines the way that they go. Now when we come to the book of Philippians, and of course that's where we're studying on Sunday afternoons. When we come to the book of Philippians, we find Paul writing this epistle from a Roman prison cell. And as hard as it is for us to believe, the book of Philippians was really Paul's contribution to the self-help book market of the first century. And by that I mean it was his book on how you can find peace and how you can get joy and how you can find the good things in life even when life isn't going all that well. Now if that doesn't speak to you, then nothing will, because the truth of the matter is, no matter who you are, at some point in your life, you're going to have to get through life when it's not going well. And you can do one of two things. You can just be a victim of circumstances, and you can mope, and you can be negative, and you can look at all the horrible things that are happening in this world, or you can choose to have a different perspective. And you can choose to be positive. You can choose to be hopeful and faithful and trust in God, knowing that He will get you through those difficult times. Well, I believe that's the attitude that Paul certainly took on this occasion. I would submit to you that he sharpened his thinking on this subject probably when he was writing the book of 2 Corinthians. Just stop right there and mark maybe the book of Philippians chapter 1 is where we're going to go back to in a moment. And turn back a few pages to 2 Corinthians. I'll show you what I'm talking about. In 2 Corinthians, listen to a few verses 7 through 9. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. There, Paul wrote this, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power might be of God and not of us. We are hard-pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. And always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. Now, do you hear the perspective that Paul took on that occasion? Noticing, and you cannot, if you'll let me say it that way, not pay attention to the things that are going on in your life that are really, really bad. I mean, they're there. Be foolish to, act like they're not there. People would say, well, you're just oblivious. You're not in touch with reality. He knew those bad things were there, but notice how he always looked at the different side of things. He even saw where bad things could turn out to be good things. So he's sharpening and honing his perspective on these matters as he is writing this book. Turn over a few more pages to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. You're familiar with this passage beginning in verse 7. When Paul said, unless I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pled with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, I am strong. So Paul is reaching this conclusion that just because bad things are taking place in your life, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. As a matter of fact, he's developing this way of thinking to know that I can look at things in a positive way even when things aren't going well in my life. So it's no wonder then as we go back over to Philippians chapter 1, and really when you just consider this whole book, that many people find this book to be one of the most appealing and inspirational books in the New Testament. It's because in the verses that we're going to study today, verses 12 through 18, we can see 3 things that lead us to know how to have a positive attitude in a negative world. How can you be a positive person in a negative world? This is paramount, I would say, for you being the type of influence that you need to be. Have you ever met a depressed, sad, negative Christian? I don't mean that Christians can't sometimes be sad or depressed and get down. I mean, we do. I mean, bad things happen and we have to make adjustments and move on from them. But I'm talking about, have you ever met the Christian that's always this way? They're always down. They're always negative. I mean, they see the negative in everything. Yeah, that person's really helping the cause of Christ, right? That person is really causing the world to see Christianity in the most positive light, right? No. What the world sees and what they say is, if that's what Christianity is about, I want nothing to do with it. And so how then can you be a positive person and have a positive impact and positive example and influence in a negative world? 3 things that he shows us in verses 12 through 18. The first of those is, if you want to do this, you've got to change the way that you think. Remember, Paul's writing this epistle from prison. And I just think about myself. If I've never been in prison, but if I found myself in prison, particularly in the kind of prison that Paul most likely was in way back there in the first century, I'm just thinking of the things I would have probably be thinking about. And if I just decided I wanted to write somebody a letter, I'd probably start talking about all the bad things that I've noticed about this prison. I would probably talk about how cold it is at night. I'd probably talk about how those chains or stocks or whatever it was that bound the person in prison, I'd probably talk about how uncomfortable that is. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, trying to sleep if you can't lie down, or if you have your hands or arms chained to a wall. I mean, how discouraging would that be to try to get comfortable? I'd probably talk about that. I'd probably talk about how great that prison food is, right? No, see, I'd be thinking about all these negative things, and that's probably what I'd want to write about. But it's amazing, though, that Paul takes a different approach. But see, the way most folks approach rough times is we notice all the bad things around us, and that's what we talk about, and that's what we bellyache about. And then That's what the world hears us talk about. They're not getting a good impression of Christianity. And it's because most people suffer from the chronic disease of stinking thinking. Stinking thinking, that's right. Now, lest you think I made that up, I didn't make that up. As a matter of fact, this is actually an entry into the online version of the Cambridge Dictionary. People suffer from stinking thinking so much that it's in the dictionary. This is the world that we live in. So no wonder we need to take a positive approach to bad things in our life. And that's exactly what the Apostle Paul decided that he was going to do. Listen to what he did. He turned the punishment of prison into a pulpit for preaching. It's amazing how he took this bad situation, and because he was able to change the way he was thinking, he could turn it into something positive. He acknowledged that prison had caused things to fall into place, or to turn out, as it says there in verse 12, for the furtherance of the gospel. The idea of furtherance means for the progress or for the advancement, of the gospel. And this is the Greek word that would often be used to describe the advancement of an army and the removal of barriers. Sometimes they would send in forces ahead of the army and they would cut down all the trees so that the army could advance and so they could fight and so they could do what armies do. Excuse me just a moment. I don't know whose water this is, but I'm about to drink it. I think it's mine from a few weeks ago. That's what I'm hoping for, at least. And so, Paul said, look, this has turned out, my imprisonment has turned out for the advancement or the furtherance or the progress of the gospel. And the only way you can look at things in the way that he did is because he changed his way of thinking. And so we read in a verse like Philippians 4, verse 8, that was read by Travis just a moment ago, then whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just. And it goes on to list a number of other things there. And it says at the end of that verse, it says to meditate. Maybe your translation says to think on these things. So that's how you get rid of stinking thinking, is you start thinking on the right things. So change the way you think if you want to be a positive person in a negative world. I would suggest to you that's a very important thing. The second thing that you need to do is to look for the open doors of opportunity to do good. Now, remember, we're talking about when bad things are happening to you, okay? All of us, when things are going good in our life, can see good opportunities. It's a lot easier maybe for us to pay attention to those things. But when things are going bad, though, look for open doors of opportunity to do good. Look in verse 13. It says, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. And ironically, Paul's open door to do good was a door that locked him in. Think about that for just a moment. His open door was a shut door. So he looked at this opportunity that most people would see as an obstacle, and he said, I can make something good out of this. He decided that not only would he think right, and I guess if I'd have been in prison, my thinking right would have probably been, maybe one of these days I'll get out of this prison. That's probably what I'd have been doing to think positive. Maybe one of these days I'll get out of this prison. But no, his thinking right led to him doing right. And he wanted to make it better. The old saying, he made lemonade out of lemons. And according to verse 13, Paul's bonds actually destroyed the barriers to reach the whole palace guard. Now, we're not sure exactly what that might mean, but more than likely it means that during his time in prison, Paul started reaching some of the guards. And he says it was the whole palace guard. The way things would have been in those days, you would have been in prison, and most likely Paul would have been chained to a soldier or a guard maybe 24 hours a day. But obviously that guard didn't stay there 24 hours a day, so they would have been rotated in shifts. And I think this is when Paul decided that he would work on his one-on-one approach to evangelism. And so every time a guard would come in and they would take the shackle off that guard and they'd put the shackle on a new guard to guard Paul, he would develop a relationship with him. I'm pretty sure that, day one, he didn't just probably launch straight into the doctrinal details of Christianity. That might have been overwhelming to the Roman guard. But he more than likely developed a relationship, and then he started teaching. And because of the barriers, or rather because of the bonds, the barriers were destroyed. And he was able to reach the whole palace guard. And it says here in this verse that this allowed those guards to see that Paul's chains were because of Christ. He used the obstacle as an opportunity. So look for the open doors to do good when you're going through bad times, if you want to be a positive person in a negative world. The third and final thing, and it's something I think that all of us probably struggle with, and that is accept that it's not all about you. Accept that it's not all about you. In our world, it's so easy to see that we live in a self-centered society. And so many people struggle with anything about life that doesn't have to do with them, especially if it comes to success or maybe acknowledging other people's success. They don't want any part of it. If it's not about them, then they don't want any part of it. Well, what am I talking about? Well, let's read a few verses here together. Look in verse 14 through 18. Paul says, and most of the brethren, remember he's in prison and he's found out that prison is maybe not such a bad place for him to be because it's caused the gospel to be spread in the palace guard. And because he's in prison, he says, most of the brethren in the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ, even from envy and strife, and some also from goodwill. The former preach Christ from selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing to add afflictions to my chains. But the latter out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached. And in this I rejoice, yes, and I will rejoice. Now, if you've done any reading at all in commentaries about these verses, you'll know that there have been all kinds of theories about the meaning of these verses. At the heart, though, of what Paul seems to be saying is he admits others were doing some good in sharing the message even besides him. It seems that Paul is talking about how some who were imperfect in their knowledge were still doing some good. How some who might have been lacking in skills were still doing some good. How some who were even selfish in their motives still might have been doing some good for the cause of Christ. And so I think there are a couple practical lessons to learn from this. One is, Paul is showing by example that he didn't believe everything was about him. He's in prison. He's not out there preaching. Now he's preaching in prison, but he's limited to what he can do out there. And yet he realizes maybe it's a good thing because some of the brethren are now becoming more bold to speak up. And he's even seeing that some of these people that maybe didn't have the purest of motives, some good still might have been accomplishing. And so he is showing us that he didn't believe that everything was about him. You know, when we start thinking that everything depends upon us, we place an unbearable burden on our backs. If you think that everything is on you right now, you are so burdened and troubled, I don't know how you're living your life. Somebody in the Bible made this mistake. Elijah, remember? Elijah in the Old Testament, he thought he was the last one left. You can read that story in 1 Kings 19:10 through 18. He even reached the point where he said to God, I alone am left. But God said, no, you're not. There are 7,000 that have not bowed their knee to Baal in Israel. Look at the contrast here. Elijah said, I'm the only one left. It's all on me. I've got all this responsibility, and he just couldn't bear it anymore. God said, wait a second, there's 7,000. See how mistaken you are? And I would suggest to you, if you think it's all on you right now, you're so mistaken. There are other people that can help, and there are other people that can rise to the occasion. And the other practical point is this. I think Paul also learned that it's okay to allow some other people to look good. It's okay if somebody else gets the credit. He acknowledged that some of these people that maybe would not have been speaking out if he was out of prison, now because he's in prison, are speaking out. And he just acknowledged that while some might not have had the same understanding and pure motives that perhaps Paul, the apostle, had, something good was still taking place. And he acknowledged that. And I think it's important for us to understand that it's okay for other people to get the credit. Pat Riley, if you know basketball, you know that he's considered one of the greatest coaches to coach in the National Basketball Association. He won 5 world championships. He was named Coach of the Year 3 different times as he coached for the LA Lakers, the New York Knicks, and then lastly the Miami Heat. You know, more than likely, if you watched basketball much back during the 1980s, that he coached LA Lakers when, they had Showtime. And Magic Johnson, of course, was one of the key players on the LA Lakers roster. Well, Pat Riley tells this story about Magic Johnson. He tells that when Magic Johnson was in junior high school, he was so much more advanced in his skills. He was taller, just better all the way around. When he was in junior high school, he would score 50 points every game. And nobody else on the team could hardly score. I mean, they might score 1 or 2 points. They'd win every game, but all of his other teammates were very unhappy because Magic Johnson was just so good that, he could just do it all. He could do it. It was all on him, and he handled that. And they'd win every game. And the other teammates got upset with him. The other parents were getting upset with him. And somehow or another, he found out about this. And so this was a unique time in Magic Johnson's young life. And here's what he decided to do. He decided that he would change his role on the team. He would become an enabler. He would become someone who passed the ball more than he shot the ball. He decided that he would try to make others on the team look good. He only played 2 years in college because he was so good. He went on to the NBA. And then he was drafted, of course, by the Los Angeles Lakers. And when he got to LA, it was a team full of superstars, but they weren't winning. And so once again, Riley said that Magic Johnson became the catalyst, deciding that he would make other players look good. He went to one of the guards named Byron Scott, who was a great athlete. He was a great shooter. And he told Byron Scott, he said, I'm going to make you the number 1 scorer on this team. I'm going to pass you the ball and you're going to score. He went to James Worthy and he said, why haven't you made the All-Star team yet? He said, I'm going to pass you the ball and you're going to score a lot more. And sure enough, James Worthy made the All-Star team. He went, of course, to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. It was about the time in his career when Kareem was about to set the all-time record for scoring. And he went to him and he said, I'm going to help you reach this goal. And he said, and I'm going to be the person that passes you the ball when you score that record-setting basket. And Riley, as he tells the story, says that the game came when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was really close to setting the record, and Magic was actually on the bench. And so he asked Coach Riley if he could go back into the game, and sure enough, he went back into the game. And he was in, and sure enough, he was the one. He was the one that made the assist, gave the pass to Kareem, and he scored that record-setting basket. And Riley says, if you'll go back and look at the videotape, you'll see Magic Johnson go leaping into the arms of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he said, if you'll look real closer, you can even see tears running down Magic Johnson's eyes, from his eyes and his face. Now, I've got to say that Magic Johnson was not the best example in life for young people or even adults to follow. If you know the story, you know what I mean. But on the basketball court, though, Pat Riley says there was not a better example of an unselfish person. He decided that he was going to make other people look good. And if you watched him, he became an outstanding dribbler and especially passer of the basketball. One of the greatest passers in the NBA. And he decided that's how I'm going to make people look good. It's not all about me. It's about other people that can do well. And I would suggest to you that a long time before there was a Magic Johnson, there was an Apostle Paul. And I believe he used this opportunity when things were not going so well in his life to say, it's okay that I'm in this prison because maybe some other people are becoming more confident to preach. Maybe some who don't have the best of motives or best understanding of things, they're still doing some good. And it's okay, and I'm all right with that. And I would suggest to you that it would be a very liberating thing for you if right now you think so much depends on you, if you just decided, maybe the whole world isn't depending on me right now. And allow somebody else to do something. As we close this lesson, I'll remind you that's why we're a part of the church. That's why we're part of a spiritual family. In the family, in your physical family, you're not expected to do it all, are you? Nobody expects one person in the family to do it all. That's why you have other family members. And when something bad happens and when you can't do it because something bad happens to you, guess what your family members do? They come to your aid and they come to your rescue and they help you. And so depend on that and rejoice in that. And that's exactly what Paul decided to do. He said, what then, verse 18, only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and in this I rejoice, yes, and I will rejoice. Remember, that's one of the themes of this book. He found a way to rejoice, to have peace, even when bad things were taking place. Maybe it is that you're burdened down with life, with circumstances that are beyond your control. It could be that you're burdened down with sin, and maybe some of these things are within your control. If you're sinning and you're trying to live the Christian life, you're confused, you're messed up, you're mixed up, and it's not possible for you to be happy and to experience joy and peace and harmony with God. And so realize that there are people who care and there are people who want to help you. And if it's a matter of just burdens, share those. And allow your church family to encourage you and pray for you. If it's a matter of sin, repent. And ask your church family to pray with you. And we'll do our very best to comfort you and to mentor you and to help you move on beyond that. And so tonight, or this afternoon, I should say, if we can help you, if we can assist you, if you're the type of person that you've allowed the world to beat you down and you're not the positive person for Jesus that you need to be, we want to give you an opportunity to make a change. Do that right now as we stand and as